Hello, hello. It's me, Arden Lee, and I'm back today with another video. And I want to talk about today a bit of a controversial subject, but I want to talk about the ideas of heaven and hell. And so if you're at all triggered by religious material, I absolutely welcome you to skip this video. It's it's a lot of personal philosophy and ways of looking at religious concepts that have been helpful to me personally in order to take the light side of spirituality out of the sort of oppressive religious dogma that we tend to face, especially in mainstream society. Before I get into what I want to talk about today, if you're not familiar with me, I'm Arden Lee, and I am the creator of the Repatterning Project, which is an 8-week course you can learn about below if you check out the link to the free PDF guide on the repatterning modality. And there's also a link to the Repatterning Parlor, which is a group that I created and moderate on Facebook for like-minded individuals who are looking to hack their beliefs and optimize their lives for success and happiness. So come join us. We're having a blast in there, and come check it out and be friends. Be friends with us. So the topic that I want to talk about today, as I said, naturally, I'm sure it's going to be quite controversial, whether it's because there are people who are so entrenched in their religious beliefs, meaning one thing and one thing only that they have already learned, or because people have been so turned off by the oppressive dogma, I suppose, of religious doctrine that they just don't want to hear it at all. So if you're either of these people, it's okay. The only reason I'm sharing this today is because it's something that has been useful, incredibly useful for me personally, and I'd love to offer the opportunity to those of you who may find use in it as well, to listen to it and see if it helps you at all. A little bit about me. I grew up both Lutheran and Catholic. I was baptized Lutheran, and I went to Catholic school for 12 years. So I kind of grew up with this weird kind of thing of like, well, even as a child, I'm in sort of two different worlds. I'm among two sets of people. You know, there's my church and then there's my school, and they kind of believe mostly the same thing, but they disagree on a few key points, and that means that they can't cross over, and I can only get Holy Communion at one place and not both of them, which struck me as kind of strange. It's like if you're talking about being all inclusive, and yet here is all this division here. So even as a child, I already kind of had an inkling of like, wow, this religion stuff is kind of bullshit. But also, I think that I had a connection to spirituality. I wanted things to feel sacred. I wanted to feel the power of ritual. I wanted to pray and to feel, to feel the presence of God. I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe in miracles. I wanted to believe that miracles were possible through God. And I was sort of looking for that in the way that adults explained it to me, and I never really quite found it that way. And I thought maybe my faith just wasn't strong enough, or maybe I just had to trust that things were happening that I couldn't see at the time. And looking back, perhaps that's true. Perhaps trusting that things were happening that I couldn't see at the time as a child is actually a way more accurate description of what went on for me religiously than not. So uh, essentially, I discarded the notion of religion when I was in my late teens, after having graduated high school and moved on to NYU, because at NYU I started studying more and more kinds of cultures. I studied a lot of Joseph Campbell, who talks about mythologies from all regions of the world, and I thought, oh, God is in all the similarities that are between all of these stories. Somehow there are all these cultures that arose organically, independently, with these different stories and different sets of beliefs. But there's so many themes running through them that you can see, everywhere. The story of Osiris in Egyptian mythology, this idea that the sun is killed and then rises again after 3 days, and we look at that same thing that happens in the Christian mythology of, or at least, or whether you believe Jesus existed or not. I do believe that Jesus existed, I don't. That's probably where me and the Christian church part ways. In terms of our beliefs about Jesus, I do believe that he existed, and I enjoy a lot of his teachings, and I'll get into a little bit about there. Uh, so but that myth of the myth of Osiris in Egyptian mythology really mirrors the story of Jesus Christ, dying and then rising again, the Son versus the Son of God, and just all of these parallels and synchronicities that crop up across so many of our mythologies. How in every mythology you have these gods and goddesses who represent these different archetypes that you see just time and time again. The universal, the Jungian archetypal collective consciousness. So going into that, I pretty much divorced myself from the idea of the Christian church because it was patriarchal, because it did not allow room for the feminine. It took all of the sexuality out of the feminine, and there was just this idea that God the Father, Jesus Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit, what is that? That didn't even make sense to me. And this idea that there was just a feeling for me as a woman that there was really no place for me there, it was just not somewhere that I belonged. There were no empowering roles for women in the story, except for, of course, the Virgin Mary, and even that wasn't terribly empowering because she, yes, she gave birth to Jesus Christ, but she underwent a lot of stress and trauma and hardship in being asked to carry him, and giving birth in a stable and all of that jazz, and even then, the fact that she was not allowed to be a sexual creature, according to this dogma that she was known for her virginity and for her piety, and personally, I did not want to consign myself to that. I did not want to believe that in order to be holy, I had to completely cut myself off from my sexuality. I hadn't even really explored my sexuality at that point because I was a pretty late bloomer as far as that goes, but it just didn't resonate with me on a soul level. So a little ways into my journey into spirituality, I suddenly, I was in a ceremony, and I had the distinct feeling, whether you want to say that this is a vision or a hallucination or an astral journey, it doesn't really matter to me. What matters is the teaching that I brought out of it. I have my own interpretation of events that I am happy with, but whatever you want, however you choose to interpret what happened to me, I got this distinct feeling that I saw hell. I went to hell, and then I saw heaven. I went to heaven as well, or at the very least, I could kind of see heaven off in the distance. It was like I could see it, I could conceive of it, and I could understand what it was, and I understood that it was possible to me, and that it was really about a state of being. It was really about what was going on with me in my mind and in my soul, and that I had actually been stuck in hell for a very long time, and that hell was really the feeling of my depression and living and reliving my trauma over and over. Not just my trauma, but living in the beliefs of shame and scarcity and hurt and pain that my trauma had left me with, that were still unhealed, that I thought was just sort of like a normal way of life, that I had not released that. I was allowing that darkness, those demons, and of course, generations upon generations upon generations of ancestral trauma, so many, if you want to believe in past lives, go for it. If you don't, that's cool. But whether it was my past lives or just coming into a society that has had so much oppression and so much trauma and so much repression of freedom of expression, especially repression of women, especially repression of women's sexuality, especially of course coming into a world where things like that have been accruing for lifetimes upon lifetimes, whether you want to argue that I lived lifetimes in those times and carried those experiences with me on a soul level, or whether you want to argue that I was just born into the world, one shot, one go around, and that's it. But I'm born into this world that also carries all of that trauma. And of course, there is the study of epigenetics as well, which means that the way that our DNA is interpreted based on traumatic or shocking events actually gets passed down through our DNA. There are things that are there are codes that are, I forget the exact biological name, but they're They're essentially things that are attached to our DNA that are sort of like their instructions. They're not it's not the DNA itself, but they're basically the things that instruct the body on how to interpret the DNA or how it should be read or coded or whatever. And those actually get affected by trauma and can be passed down hereditarily. Yes, hereditarily. It can be passed down in our genes throughout our generations. So whether you want to argue that or not, all of this pain, all of this heaviness, all of this suffering that I was in, I recognized that as being hell, and I recognized, looking around the room at other people who were really content and peaceful and blissed out. I was like, oh, that looks like heaven. And there's this really interesting parable, and I believe it originated from a rabbi. So it originated from a practitioner of the Jewish faith, but I remember hearing it in my Lutheran church. There's this story that explains the difference between heaven and hell. And the difference between heaven and hell essentially is that they say in hell, everyone is sitting around the table with this delicious food in front of them, and they've got like 6-foot long utensils, so they can't fit them into their mouths, and so they're just sitting there and being miserable. And that in heaven, it's the same exact scenario where they've all got this delicious food in front of them with these 6-foot long utensils, but the difference is that in heaven, they're feeding each other from across the table. So really the difference between heaven and hell is, are you playing a zero-sum game, or are you playing a win-win scenario? Are you playing, are you convinced that it's either you or the rest of the world, that it's either your happiness or someone else's happiness, that if you don't save this money for your grandchildren, that someone else is going to get it, and and you have to hoard and collect all that you can for yourself and your family and your future generations in order to keep everyone safe, or are you coming from a place of like, no, there's enough to go around, and actually the survival of one person is the survival of all of us, and we all need each other to survive, so let's lift each other all up, because I know if I lift you up, at some point you're also going to lift me up too when I need you. So if we're really just trying to all be out for ourselves, then that's hell, according to that parable, and heaven is where we are moving into a win-win scenario. Something that Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is, I suppose I would describe him as a high-level systems analyst and philosopher. I'm not sure if he would describe himself that way, but he has some remarkable talks out there. If you look him up, Daniel Schmachtenberger, there's a talk on YouTube called The Transition that he and 2 other men give that is really, really good. He's talking a lot lately about preserving our environment, saving our economy, and everything that it always comes back to is this idea of omni-consideration, of understanding that if the planet is to survive, if we are to survive, even in our environment, and we have to stop like littering, we have to stop like actually we have to start addressing global warming. We have to start addressing all of those concerns so that everyone can survive. So it's not just that guy at the Fortune 500 company or whatever saying, well, I'm just going to pollute the ocean because it drives my profits up, and I don't care about our future. I don't care about other people who might be at stake, who are also living on this planet. Same with our economy. We have to start looking at the fact that our Medicaid and our Social Security is literally being dipped into in order to pay for stupid wars that we and military expenses that not all of us are in favor of. We're literally killing each other off instead of actually reinvesting our resources in the survival of everyone, especially in this current administration where where people are there's just so much blatant disregard for people who are different, for people who are not as privileged, for people who don't have wealth and status, and ultimately it's coming from that place of fear, from that place of if we can't all survive together, I need to survive, which means you can't survive. If you're an illegal immigrant, then oh no, you're a bad person, you're a bad hombre. That means you're gonna that means that I'm unsafe or whatever, and that's the difference. It's ultimately, it's like, are we competing with each other? Are we afraid of each other? Or are we all cooperating? Are we all moving forward. And for me, heaven is that feeling that no matter what has happened to you in the past, no matter what timelines you've been living in, no matter how much stress or trauma that you've had around you, when Jesus talks about heaven, and like I said, I really am a big fan of the teachings of Jesus, despite not identifying as a Christian, because just low key between you and me, I don't think Jesus ever intended to start a religion around himself. And if he did, I think it's very funny that the symbol of that religion, and I'm wearing them as earrings today, appropriately enough, just because I'm goth, really, not because I'm Christian, but the symbol of this religion they decided to start after the teachings of Jesus Christ was literally symbolized. Literally, this religion is symbolized by the instrument of Jesus' death, which I don't know why they chose to do that. I think that's kind of silly. But if anyone ever starts a religion based off of all my teachings in my YouTube channel after I die, please choose a symbol that has nothing to do with my PTSD, please. I beg of you. But as I said, I'm a big fan of the teachings of Jesus Christ. And when he tells those parables about how the workers in the vineyards, whether they started at sunrise or whether they started at noon or whether they started, as the sun was starting to go down, they all got paid the same amount at the end of the day. As a kid, I used to think, well, that's unfair. If you've worked for longer, you should earn more of a reward. But the truth is that the reward of heaven is infinite, because what that means is that it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter at what point in life you decide to heal, because once you heal all of that stress and that trauma around you, you can look back at your life and say, actually, wow, all of it was worth it, because it led me to here. I no longer feel pain about my past, and that's why the eternal reward of heaven is this idea of infinity along the timeline, that you can look back at everything. I can look back at some of my worst traumas now and say, that sucked that happened to me or whatever, but I'm fine now, so I'm fine with all of it, because I'm a cross section through space-time, and I'm not living in the past. I'm living now, but I'm living in this eternal present where I can look back at my past and I can be okay with how things unfolded, so it doesn't matter whether I started working in the vineyard, at sunrise or at noon or late in the day, when it was like 2015, 2016 that I decided to really get my shit together and heal myself for real. And that doesn't mean that all the other times that I was not doing that work no longer count. It actually means that, I look back and everything along the timeline has changed, because I feel better now in the present, and I have trust and faith that my future will be the same. And if it's not, then I know how to deal with it, I know how to handle it, and I know how to process it, and I can let it go through and move on. So in my opinion, that's the definition, that's the distinction between heaven and hell that I've really come up with, is that hell, for me, hell is depression, hell is anxiety, hell is fear, hell is scarcity, and all of the stress and all the overwhelm and all the anxiety that goes along with that. And heaven, the eternal reward of heaven, the forgiveness, quote unquote, of heaven. That's a charged word, forgiveness, right? Forgiveness just means that you can release your attachment to your past, and you're just not bothered by it anymore. You're not stressed about it anymore. Sure, yeah, it sucked. That doesn't mean that everything that happened to you is okay, but it's not ruling you anymore. It doesn't have power over you anymore. And heaven is the freedom to just be in your infinite bliss, to be in your happiness, and to create a life that you love. And that's, of course, what is meant by heaven on earth. And Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is upon us. We're right here, like we're in it right now. And he also said, he didn't really want to be worshipped. He said in Matthew, he said, you will go on to do greater things than I. And I like to think that with all the miracles that Jesus performed, that he was really the original magician. Like he was a really skilled mage. He was a wise man. And and so now for me coming in and doing my work in the world, I look at that and I'm like, okay, I might not be able to do greater things than Jesus did, but if he's out there saying that I'm capable of it, then it seems kind of silly not to at least try. So here I am doing my work in the world and creating art that I love, and conducting magic and performing little tiny everyday miracles wherever I can. And those are the beliefs that help me get there. The belief that that heaven is something that is accessible to us now, that it's not something that we have to wait for an afterlife for, that it is about bliss and happiness. And it's gotten so corrupted by the religious dogma that is out there today, because essentially, you put anything in the hands of humans and they'll figure out a way to corrupt it for their own power eventually. So of course they were going to say heaven means, it's a place you go after you die if you're good, and good means giving us money, and good means behaving yourselves and not going out and not going out and practicing connecting to spirit without us to bridge you there. That's why, hence all the attacks on witchcraft, which is really just an attempt to get to spirit without an intermediator, an intermediary, an intercessor, shall we say. And that being good versus being bad, I really looked at that sort of morality. It never really resonated with me or made sense, because I didn't, I tried it and I didn't really understand it, because even when I was very good and I obeyed, and still bad things were happening to me. Even when I turned the other cheek, it wasn't, I turned the other cheek and I got hit again. So it, it just, it happens like that. So apparently turn the other cheek was actually like, it was actually, I forget the exact meaning of it, but someone turned me on to this recently. Apparently it was actually an act of defiance to like the Roman guards or something. Like you could only, I don't, whatever it was like a means of like protesting. So I don't know. I'll have to look into that one more in the future. But apparently there was some added context that most religious people do not teach these days, when Jesus apparently said that. So but yeah, good and bad never got me that reward. The more I tried to be a good person, the more I turned the other cheek and let people take advantage of me, the more miserable I was. So really, people who try to do things for themselves to reclaim their power and their agency often have stumbling blocks, thinking like, oh, well, does this make me a bad person? Does this make me selfish if I'm trying to live my life for me? What about that commandment, honor thy father and mother, the fourth commandment? Does it make me a bad person if I cut my parents out? And I just want to say, no, absolutely not. And the heaven that Jesus was talking about, in my opinion, it is that bliss of healing and realizing that we can be happy right now, and we don't have to be in hell. We don't have to be with those hellish forces. And if your parents are possessed by a demon, if they're in their own hell themselves and they're projecting that hell onto you, then no, you don't have to join them in that. You can be in heaven and you can invite people to join you there. You don't have to save everybody. You don't have to bend to everyone else's will. You can just be the lighthouse. You can be that leader that says, hey, I'm going to just shine the light and lead the way home. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will, if you got all this way and you didn't mind all the religious stuff, I really hope this was helpful for you, and thank you for watching. This, as I said, this is something that's pretty personal to me. It really works well for me, so if it works well for you too, I hope it does. So thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.